Don't hang up, she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. If you end this call, I'm dead before morning. Damien Moretti froze. Nobody reached his private line without bleeding for it first. But this voice, terrified, quiet, completely certain, wasn't asking for money. She was warning him. And something in that terrified silence made the most feared man in New York unable to move. If this story already has your heart-pounding, hit subscribe right now, drop the name of your city in the comments below, and follow every part to the end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The phone rang at 2:13 in the morning. Damien Moretti was already awake. He was always awake at this hour. Sleep was a luxury he had given up somewhere around the age of 30, when the weight of everything he had built and everything he had destroyed to build it made closing his eyes feel more dangerous than keeping them open. He sat at the window of his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him, watching the lights of New York burn below. Millions of people down there, all of them living their small, ordinary lives. Worrying about ordinary things. Bills. Arguments. The kind of problems that dissolved by morning. Damien had not worried about ordinary things in a very long time. When the phone buzzed against the glass table, he looked at the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it go to silence, almost. But something held his hand. A feeling he could not name and would not try to. In his world, feelings were liabilities. Instincts were survival. And his instincts right now were telling him to answer set. He pressed the phone to his ear. Who gave you this number? Silence. Then a sound that stopped him cold. Breathing. Small. Careful. The kind of breathing a person does when they are trying very hard not to make any noise at all. Hello? Damien's voice dropped. Not gentler, just quieter. More precise. Please, the word came out like a splinter. Like it had been held in so long that releasing it caused physical pain. Please. Don't hang up. Damien set down the whiskey glass. Who are you? It was not a question. It never was with him. Questions implied uncertainty. Damien Moretti did not do uncertainty. Another pause. Then, my name is Lena Whitaker. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Controlled, desperate. Like someone trying to speak through a closed fist. I worked for the City Emergency Dispatch Center on 44th. And I know that calling you is probably the worst decision I've ever made. But every other decision I've made in the last 6 days has almost gotten me killed. So here we are. Damien stood slowly, walked away from the window. Not out of fear. Damien did not fear anything that moved on 2 legs, but out of the instinct that told him this conversation required his full attention. You're telling me your name, he said. Your workplace. You're giving me information freely. Which means either you're very brave or very stupid. Neither. A short, hollow sound that might have been a laugh. I'm very out of options. People with no options come to me for money. For protection. For favors. He stopped walking. You said my name like you know who I am. So you know I don't do this for free, and I don't do it for strangers. I'm not calling to ask you for anything. Her breath caught. I'm calling to warn you. The room got very quiet. Damien had been threatened before. He had been warned before. He had received every kind of message that powerful men send when they want you afraid. None of them had ever been delivered by a woman whispering at 2 in the morning with the sound of genuine terror underneath every syllable. Warn me, he repeated. About what? About Marcus Vale. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Damien said very quietly, Start talking. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Not because she was careless. Damien could hear the structure behind her words. The precision. This was a woman who had organized her thoughts before she dialed. Who had decided exactly what to say and in what order. Like someone who understood, she might only get one chance to be believed. 6 days ago, Lena Whitaker had been reviewing a backlog of emergency incident reports at her workstation, a routine audit she performed every quarter. Cross-referencing call logs against outcome records. Making sure the numbers matched. They almost never didn't match. But that night they did not match. 3 calls, she said. Over the past 8 months, 3 separate emergencies. 1 apartment fire, 1 car accident, 1 reported home invasion. Different parts of the city. Different response teams. No connection on paper, but Damien said. But the call logs showed something wrong. Each incident had a secondary dispatch request that never made it into the official record. Someone at the supervisory level had manually deleted the follow-up calls. Scrubbed them from the system. That happens. Not like this, it doesn't. Her voice sharpened slightly. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Certainty. The steady, quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what they saw. I cross-referenced the addresses against property records. All 3 locations were either owned by a Vail Holdings subsidiary or had pending sale agreements with Vail Holdings at the time of the incidents. In one case, the home invasion happened 48 hours before a building sale that would have given the tenants a full year to contest. After the incident, every tenant moved out voluntarily within 3 weeks. Damien said nothing. The car accident victim, Lena continued, was a woman named Patricia Howe. She was a city council aide. She had filed 2 formal complaints against a zoning variance application Vail Holdings had pushed through. The accident happened the night before she was scheduled to testify at a public hearing. She survived, but she withdrew her testimony from the hospital. Said she wanted to put it behind her. People change their minds. The fire, Lena said, killed one person, elderly man. Walter Drain. He had lived in that building for 31 years. He was the last remaining holdout tenant. Vail Holdings had been trying to buy out his lease for 2 years. He refused. Every time. The fire marshal ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring. Maybe it was Damien. She said his name for the first time. Direct. Like a door being pushed open. Walter Drain had solar panels. That building was completely rewired 18 months before the fire. I pulled the electrical inspection records. They were clean. And the follow-up call that was deleted from our system? It was from a witness in the building next door who said she saw 2 men leaving the back exit of the building at 3 a.m. 40 minutes before the smoke alarm went off. Silence. That witness, Lena said. I found her name in the original log before it was scrubbed. Maria Fontaine. I tried to contact her. She moved out of the city 2 weeks after the fire. Left her job, left her apartment. Forwarding address goes to a P.O. box in Nevada that hasn't received mail in 6 months. Damien walked back to the window. Below him, New York breathed and hummed and carried on. Marcus Vail. He had crossed paths with Vail exactly twice in his life. Not professionally, not socially, just the way that powerful men in the same city sometimes find themselves in the same room without wanting to be there. Charity galas. A mayoral dinner. The kind of events where everyone shook hands and smiled and said absolutely nothing true to each other. Vail was careful, polished, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He had a foundation that funded arts programs in public schools. His photograph was on the wall of 3 hospitals. He was on the governor's advisory board, and if Lena Whitaker was right, he had burned an old man alive to clear a real estate deal. Why me, Damien said, not challenging, genuinely asking. Because 4 days ago, I took what I found to my supervisor. He told me I was misreading the data and to drop it. She paused. The next morning he didn't come in. His wife said he called in sick. That evening I got a message on my personal cell. Number I've never given to anyone at work, it said. Stop looking, or you become the next story nobody remembers. Those exact words. And you called the police. I called my precinct liaison. He's someone I've worked with for 3 years. He told me he'd look into it and call me back. That was 60 hours ago, a beat. That same night my apartment was searched. Not broken into, searched. Everything was put back almost exactly right. Almost. They wanted me to know someone had been there. I've been moving every night since. I'm at a motel right now. Paid cash. Different name. Smart. I'm not trying to be smart, she said. I'm trying to stay alive long enough to figure out what to do with what I know. Her voice dropped again. I called you because you're the only person in this city who Marcus Vail doesn't own, can't buy, and actually has reason to care if he's operating this way. Because whatever your business is, and I'm not asking about your business, you need the city to function a certain way. And if Vale is bribing or threatening or eliminating anyone who gets in his way, eventually that touches everyone. Damien was quiet for a long moment. That's either very smart thinking, he said, or a very dangerous way to get me involved. It's both, Lena said simply. I know it's both, but I'm out of people who aren't afraid of him. And you didn't hang up. He told her to stay where she was. He did not tell her everything was going to be fine. He did not promise her protection. He did not make her feel safe with words, because words were what people offered when they had nothing real to give. What he said was, don't move. Don't call anyone else. I'll have someone at that motel in 40 minutes. Why would you do that? Her voice was careful, not grateful. Careful. He almost respected her for it. Because if what you're describing is real, you're not the only person in danger. He picked up the whiskey glass. Set it back down without drinking. And because you were right about one thing. What Vale is doing doesn't stay contained. That's not a personal reason. No, he said. It's not. He hung up. For a moment he just stood there, in the dark and the quiet of his penthouse, with New York spread out below him like a problem he hadn't yet solved. Then he called Leo. Leo Caruso had been with Damien for 11 years. He was not a kind man. He was not a gentle man. But he was loyal in the way that very few people were loyal, not because he was paid, but because he had chosen it. Because Damien had once pulled him out of a situation that should have ended him, and Leo had never forgotten that debts like that didn't have a price. I need you to pick someone up, Damien said. Woman. Name is Lena Whitaker. She's at... He relayed the motel name and cross streets she had given him. Bring her to the East Side property, not the main house. The apartment above the garage. And Leo, yeah, she comes to no harm. Anyone touches her, you answer to me personally. A pause on the other end. This woman's someone important. She's someone who has information I need to understand. Leo did not push further. That was what made him valuable. After he hung up, Damien called 2 more people, men who owed him nothing except the understanding that when he called, you listen. He had them begin pulling everything publicly available on Marcus Vale. Financial records, property filings, corporate structures. Then he sat back down at the window and waited. Lena arrived at the apartment above the garage at 3:47 a.m. Damien watched from the window as the car pulled in. Watched Leo open the door. Watched the woman climb out. She was smaller than her voice had suggested. Not fragile, just compact. The kind of person who moved with deliberate efficiency, like someone accustomed to navigating through chaos without extra motion. She was carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder and a laptop case in her hand. Her eyes, even from this distance, were scanning everything. Not panicking, cataloging. He went downstairs. When he walked into the small front room, she turned to face him immediately. People usually flinched at his presence, or tried to hide that they were flinching. It was a tell he had learned to read in an instant. Fear dressed up as calm. Lena Whitaker looked at him like she was filing information. You're taller than I expected, she said. You're calmer than you sounded on the phone. I've been managing other people's emergencies for 4 years. Being calm is a professional requirement. He sat down on the edge of the table. Not to be casual, to be at a level where he could see her face clearly. Show me what you have. She set the laptop case on the table, opened it, and began talking. For the next 2 hours, Damien Moretti, a man who had built his life on the principle that other people's problems were their own, sat in a small room above a garage and listened to a woman dismantle everything he thought he knew about Marcus Vale. The documents were meticulous. She had screenshots of the dispatch logs, before and after the deletions she had taken them, the night she found the discrepancy, before reporting to her supervisor, before anything went wrong. She had printed copies stored separately. She had the property records, the timeline of the incidents, the names of the deleted witnesses. A financial analysis she had constructed herself, tracing the post-incident property sales through 5 different LLC shell companies before they landed back in the Vale Holdings umbrella. Where did you learn to do this? He asked. My father was an accountant. She did not look up from the screen. He used to say that money always tells the truth. You just have to know how to make it talk. Damien studied her profile. The set of her jaw, the way her hands moved over the keyboard. Efficient. No wasted gestures. You've had this material for 6 days, he said. You haven't gone to any media. Anyone I go to in media calls Vale Holdings for comment before they publish anything. The story gets killed, or I get an accident. She looked up then. I needed someone who could act first and verify later. Someone who had enough power that Vale couldn't simply delete them from the equation. And you think that's me? I think you're the only person I've found so far who picked up a phone call from an unknown number at 2 in the morning and didn't hang up. He held her gaze for a moment. There are people in my organization, he said, who would tell me this is a setup, that you're a plant, that Vale sent you to get me tangled in something I can't walk away from. She nodded. That's a reasonable concern. Are you? No. No hesitation. No performance of offense. Just a straightforward answer. But I have no way to prove that to you that you would trust. So you'll have to decide based on what's in front of you. He appreciated that. He had spent his life surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear. People who performed innocence and performed loyalty and performed gratitude. Lena Whitaker performed nothing. She simply stated facts and let him draw his own conclusions. Get some sleep, he said. Leo will be outside. In the morning I'll have someone bring you food and we'll talk again. She hesitated. I'm not your guest, she said carefully. I didn't come here to be kept somewhere. You came here because you had nowhere else to go. He stood. That doesn't mean you're a prisoner. It means you're somewhere Vale can't find you tonight. Use it. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you helping me? He stopped at the door, did not turn around. I'm not helping you, he said. I'm helping myself understand a problem. He walked out before she could answer. But in the quiet of the hallway, in the dark hours before the city woke back up, something moved in him that he did not have a name for. Not pity, he did not do pity, not obligation. He owed this woman nothing. Something quieter than either of those things. Something that had to do with the way she had said the words, every other decision I've made has almost gotten me killed, and then kept going anyway. She reminded him of someone. He did not let himself think about who. By 6 in the morning, Damien's people had pulled enough on Marcus Vale to confirm 3 things. First, Vale Holdings had completed 17 major property acquisitions in the past 4 years. 12 of them had involved some form of prior dispute tenant resistance, city council opposition, or permit complications that had been resolved suddenly and completely, in Vale's favor, within weeks of the incident Lena had documented. Second, the financial trail Lena had begun to map was more complex than she had reached. It ran through offshore accounts in 3 different jurisdictions before washing back into legitimate real estate investment vehicles. Whoever had constructed it knew what they were doing. Third, Marcus Vale had, in the past 2 years, made substantial donations to the campaigns of 4 sitting city officials, including the Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Emergency Management, who oversaw the city's emergency dispatch system, who had the administrative authority to access and modify dispatch records. Damien sat with this information for a long time. Then he went back upstairs to where Lena was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a notebook full of her own handwriting, and he told her what he had found. She went very still. Then she said, almost to herself, he didn't just delete the records. He had someone inside the system who could do it without a trace. Someone with clearance. She looked up. My supervisor. He wasn't just warned off. He was already compromised. That's what the money says. Which means that when I went to him, he called Vale before you got back to your desk. Damien's voice was flat. Not cruel, just precise. Lena set down the pen. Something moved across her face then. Not fear, she had moved through fear. This was something harder. The look of someone who has just understood exactly how thoroughly they were surrounded, and has chosen not to collapse about it. Okay, she said quietly. Just that, okay. There are people who will want to use this material against Vale, Damien said. Business rivals. Political opponents. I could hand it to any of them in the next 12 hours and be done with it. And they'd bury the evidence about the people who were hurt, she said immediately. Patricia Howe, Walter Drain, Maria Fontaine. They'd use the financial information to pressure Vale privately. Make a deal. Nothing would ever become public. Damien said nothing. I know that's probably what makes sense for you, Lena said. I know that's probably the logical play. Use what I brought you to leverage something. Not to actually change anything. She met his eyes. I'm not going to pretend I have power over what you do with what I told you. I don't. You have everything now. You could send me back to that motel and forget this conversation happened. I could, he agreed. But I'm asking you not to. She did not look away. Not for me. For Walter Drain. He was 73 years old, and he lived in that apartment for 31 years and someone killed him, so Marcus Vale could put up a luxury development. He deserves to be more than a deleted record. Damien looked at her for a long time. Outside, the city was waking up. He could feel it more than hear it. The low rumble of morning beginning. He had built his life on the principle that sentiment was a weakness. That caring about outcomes beyond your own interests was how people got destroyed. He had watched it happen to others. He had never let it happen to him. But there was something about the way Lena said, that old man's name. Walter Drain. Not a file, not evidence, a person. Tell me everything else you remember, Damien said. Everything. Things you thought were too small to matter. And Lena Whitaker, who had called a stranger in the dark with nothing but her voice and her evidence and her refusal to give up, leaned forward over the table and began to talk. Because the most feared man in New York had decided to listen. And for now, that was enough. She had not slept. Damien knew this before he even walked into the room. He could tell by the way she was sitting, not resting, not slouched, but upright and tight-shouldered, the posture of someone who had been awake so long that their body had forgotten what relaxing felt like. The notebook in front of her was covered on both sides. She had run out of blank pages sometime in the night and started writing in the margins. He set a fresh cup of coffee on the table without saying anything. She reached for it without looking up. You found more, he said. Not a question. My dispatch system uses a tiered logging architecture, she said. Meaning every entry generates a primary record and a backup shadow record. The shadow records are stored separately. They're not accessible from the main interface. They exist for audit purposes. Nobody's supposed to know they're there unless they've read the full technical documentation for the system. And you read the full technical documentation. When I first started the job, I read everything. She finally looked up. Dark circles. Eyes that were exhausted but still sharp. Completely, uncompromisingly sharp. The shadow records can't be deleted without physical access to the server room. Whoever scrubbed the primary logs didn't know about them. Or they forgot. Damien pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The shadow records are still there. The shadow records are still there. She turned the laptop toward him. All 3 incidents. Complete. Unaltered. Including the secondary dispatch calls, the witness reports, and the response codes. Everything that was deleted from the primary system is sitting in the shadow archive. He looked at the screen, at the timestamps, at the call transcripts that someone had been very certain no longer existed. Can you access them remotely? I already did. Last night. I copied everything to 3 separate encrypted drives. She reached into her canvas bag and placed 2 small USB drives on the table. One is yours. One I keep. The third, she paused. The third I mailed to an address last night. Before your man picked me up. Someone who doesn't know what it is or why they have it. But if I stop checking in with them every 48 hours, they open it and follow the instructions inside. Damien stared at her. You mailed a dead man's switch before you even knew if I was going to help you. I mailed a dead man's switch before I made the phone call, she corrected. I wasn't going to contact you without having something outside my control. If you turned out to be connected to Vale, or if you decided the cleanest solution was to make me disappear, at least the evidence survives. He should have been offended. By any normal standard of the world he operated in, someone taking that kind of creation against him was a provocation. It was a statement of distrust. It was leverage held against him by a woman who had absolutely nothing else. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Smart, he said quietly. Necessary, she said. He picked up the USB drive and turned it over in his hand. My people have been pulling Vale's financial architecture since 4 this morning. The shell company structure you traced is the outer layer. There are 3 more layers underneath it. He's been running investment vehicles through Malta, Cyprus, and a small private bank in Luxembourg that specializes in real estate holding structures for European clients. He set the drive down. On paper, every dollar is clean. But the timing of the capital movements against the property acquisition dates is not a coincidence. Lena opened her notebook to a page near the back. I mapped the acquisition timeline last night against public permit records. Every property where there was a dispute or a complication, the timeline between the incident and the successful acquisition averages 19 days. 19 days, Damien. That's not coincidence. That's an operation. The sound of his name in her mouth was still startling. Not because it was inappropriate, because nobody said it the way she did, without deference, without yolaidakshinj, without the slight upward inflection that people used when they wanted something from him. She said it like a word, just a word, like he was just a person. He could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like that. Patricia Howe, he said, the council aide. Do you know where she is now? Still in the city. She left her council position 8 months ago. She's working at a nonprofit in Harlem. Housing advocacy. Lena's voice went flat for a moment. She advocates for tenants' rights, for people who are being pushed out of their homes. The weight of that settled between them. A woman who had been run off the road and terrified out of her testimony was now spending her days fighting for the people Vale was still displacing. Whether she had connected those 2 things or not, Damien didn't know. I want to talk to her, Lena said. No, she's a witness. She's a survivor, Damien said. There's a difference. She made a choice to move away from what happened to her. You approach her now, without knowing whether she's been watched, without knowing whether Vale still has eyes on her, you put her back in the target zone. Lena was quiet for a moment. You're right, she said. Not reluctantly, just factually. That was the other thing about her. She did not argue for the sake of arguing. She did not dig in when she was wrong. She assessed, adjusted, moved forward. It was the most efficient way to operate under pressure, and almost nobody actually did it. Give me 48 hours, Damien said. I need to understand the full shape of what Vale has built before we move on any piece of it. If we go at one thread without knowing how everything connects, he cuts the thread and moves the rest underground. And in 48 hours, what happens? In 48 hours, I'll know enough to take this somewhere it can't be buried. She looked at him steadily. You mean you'll know enough to decide whether taking it somewhere is worth it to you? He did not deny it. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that answer. Like it told her something she needed to know. Okay, she said. 48 hours. She reached for her coffee again. And then, for the first time since she had walked into that room, her hand shook slightly. Just slightly. She caught it, steadied it, wrapped both hands around the cup. Damien pretended not to see it, but he saw it. The call from Rico came at 9:30. Rico Valdez was not someone Damien used often. He was expensive. He was precise. He operated in a layer of the city that existed between the legitimate world and the underground one, the layer where information lived, where the people who knew things professionally stored those things, and where the right amount of money and the right kind of introduction could open doors that had no handles on the outside. Your man Vale, Rico said. You want the bad news or the worse news? Start with bad. He's got a contact inside NYPD. Not street level. Senior. Someone with access to investigative databases. Meaning if anyone has run a search on the woman's name in the last 72 hours. Damien was already moving toward the stairs. He knows she's still active. He knows somebody's still pulling threads. Whether he's connected it to her specifically, I can't say yet. A pause. The worst news. The deputy commissioner you identified, the one with the campaign donations, he made 2 phone calls last night. One to a number registered to a Vale Holdings executive. One to a number that pings a cell tower in Newark. Newark. The cell tower is 3 blocks from a logistics company that has no listed employees, no public contracts, and a lease paid 18 months in advance in cash. Damien was already at the apartment door. How long do I have? If they know she's in the city and they're motivated. Maybe a day. Maybe less. Depends on how many people they're willing to put on it. He hung up and pushed open the door. Lena looked up from the table. We need to move you, Damien said now. She did not ask why. She closed the laptop, put the notebook in the bag, zipped it, and stood up in one continuous motion. Where? Somewhere smaller. Somewhere that doesn't have my name attached to it. He was already thinking through the options. Not safe houses, those were known to too many people. Something clean, something off the map of everything connected to him. You'll be with someone I trust completely. You'll have everything you need to keep working. Damien. She said it with just enough weight to make him stop and look at her. They know I'm still moving, don't they? It was not quite a question. They know someone is still pulling threads. They may not know it's you specifically. But they will. She said it calmly, the way she would state a weather forecast. Not as catastrophe, as information. So what's the play? He looked at her. This woman who had been running for 6 days on caffeine and fear and pure refusal to stop. Who had built a dead man's switch before she made a single phone call. Who said okay like it was armor. The play, he said, is that we stop running and start building something they can't knock down. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her bag. Then let's go, she said. He moved her to an apartment in Astoria belonging to a woman named Carla. Carla was 62 years old and had the energy of someone half that age and the patience of someone twice it. She had been a bookkeeper for 30 years. She had worked for Damien's organization in a peripheral capacity, handling legitimate accounting for 3 of his front businesses. But she was not part of the inner structure. She was not someone Vale's people would ever think to look at. She took one look at Lena and said, "You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in a week." 6 days, Lena said. Sit down. Damien left them there. Not because he did not want to stay. Because staying would have been sentimental, and sentimentality, right now, was something he could not afford. He had work to do. The full picture of Marcus Vale's operation took shape over the next 14 hours. Damien had 4 people working it from different angles. Financial records, property filings, city permit databases, court records. The kind of research that was tedious and invisible and absolutely essential. The kind that nobody noticed until the moment it was too late to stop what it revealed. What emerged was worse than Lena had described, not because her analysis was wrong. Her analysis was exactly right. It was worse because what she had found was only the most recent layer. Vale had been operating this way for nearly a decade. The 3 incidents she had identified were not aberrations. They were refinements of a method he had been developing since his first major real estate acquisition 12 years ago. Damien sat with the full timeline in front of him and felt something he had not expected to feel. Anger, not the sharp operational anger that sometimes came with betrayal or confrontation. Something slower, colder. The kind of anger that settles into your chest when you understand that something has been happening for a long time, in plain sight, to people who had no way to stop it, and the world kept going as if it was fine. Walter Drain. He let himself think about the old man for 30 seconds. 73 years old, 31 years in that apartment. A man who had stayed when everyone else left, who had said no when a powerful man wanted him gone, who had lived by his own terms until someone decided his terms were inconvenient. 30 seconds. Then he put it away and went back to work. At 11 that night his phone rang. Not his private line. The secondary number, the one he used for operational calls. He answered, "Mr. Moretti." The voice was smooth, comfortable. The voice of a man who was accustomed to making calls and having them received with immediate deference. "I think we should talk." Damien recognized the voice immediately. Marcus Vale. He said nothing. Let the silence sit. "I understand you've developed an interest in some of my business activities," Vale continued. "I also understand you may be in contact with a former city employee who has some misguided concerns about certain records." A pause, carefully measured. I want to be very clear that I have great respect for your operation and your standing in this city. I'm not calling to make threats. I'm calling because I believe two intelligent men can resolve a misunderstanding before it becomes something neither of us wants." Damien's voice came out flat and even. "What misunderstanding?" "The young woman has some documents that she believes tell a story. What she doesn't understand is the context, the complexity of certain city processes. The way that large-scale development sometimes requires difficult decisions that, taken in isolation, can appear." "She has shadow archive records," Damien said, "from 3 separate incidents, with witness testimony that was deleted from the primary system, along with a financial trail that connects the capital movements to the acquisition timeline across 12 properties." He let that land. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern." A long pause. When Vale spoke again, the smoothness was still there. But underneath it, something had shifted. Something that was not quite anger. More like the adjustment a very controlled man makes when he realizes the conversation is not going the direction he planned. "I see you've been thorough," Vale said. "I'm always thorough. Then you understand that the kind of exposure you're contemplating would create significant disruption. Not just for me, for certain relationships and arrangements that affect the stability of mine." "Are you telling me," Damien said very quietly, "that if I pursue this, there will be consequences for my operation?" "I'm saying that disruption has a way of spreading." "Yes," Damien said. "It does." He hung up. Then he sat completely still for approximately 30 seconds, doing nothing except understanding what that phone call meant. Vale knew, not just that Lena was alive and had documents. He knew Damien had seen them. He knew the scope of what was in front of them. And he had called personally, not sent a representative, not sent a message through an intermediary, which meant he was either confident enough in his position to negotiate directly or nervous enough to try. Damien was not sure which. He was not sure it mattered. What mattered was that the call had happened at all, and that Vale had found his secondary number. He called Leo. "Someone inside my organization gave Vale my operational line," he said. Silence on the other end. "I know," Leo said. "You know. I've had a suspicion for 2 days. I didn't want to bring it to you without being certain." Another pause. "Longer. I think it's Nico. Nico Ferreira, 26 years old. Had been with the organization for 3 years. Smart, quiet, capable. The kind of young man that Damien had, he now realized, never fully tested." "Find out," Damien said. "Don't move on it until I say. I need to know first whether Nico told Vale anything else. Whether Vale knows about the Astoria location. And if he does, then we move Lena again tonight." Leo hung up. Damien walked to the window. Outside, the city went on. Indifferent, enormous. Full of people living their small, ordinary lives, completely unaware that somewhere in the web of power and money and accumulated consequence that ran underneath all of it, a man had just threatened him. A young woman was sitting in Astoria, going through evidence on a laptop, and somewhere in his own organization there was a betrayal he had not yet confirmed, but already knew was true. He called Carla. "Is she still working?" Carla's voice was dry. "She hasn't stopped. I put food in front of her an hour ago, and she ate it without looking away from the screen. Don't tell her about the phone call. Tell her I'll be there in the morning, with an update. And if she asks before morning," he thought about that. "Tell her we're still building," he said. "Tell her nothing has changed." He hung up. Nothing had changed. That was almost true. What had changed was that Vale had tipped his hand. He had called, which meant he was not certain he could move on Lena without consequences. He was not certain what Damien would do, and uncertainty in a man like Marcus Vale was not a comfortable condition. It made people reach for the tools that had always worked before. Force, elimination, control. Damien needed to move faster than that reaching. He pulled out his laptop and sent a message to the 2 people he trusted most outside his organization. Not criminal contacts, not leverage holders. 2 people who operated in a world adjacent to his, a journalist who had spent 15 years covering financial corruption and had published 3 investigations that had put powerful people in federal prison, and a former federal prosecutor who had left the government for private practice and still had enough contacts inside the system to know exactly which doors opened and which were painted on. He did not explain the full situation. He did not attach files. He simply said, "I have something significant. Timeline is urgent. I need to know if you're available." Both responded within 12 minutes. He looked at their answers and felt the shape of something beginning to form. Not a plan yet, a possibility, the outline of a direction in which things could move that was different from the direction Vale expected. Vale expected him to negotiate. Vale expected that any man with Damien's interests would calculate the cost and choose the path of least disruption. Vale did not know, could not know that something had happened in the past 24 hours that Damien himself had not entirely processed. That a woman with a canvas bag and a dead man's switch and dark circles under her eyes had said the name Walter Drain, like it was a person who mattered, and that something in Damien Moretti had answered that. Not because he was sentimental, not because he had stopped being the man he was, but because he had been building walls for so long that he had forgotten there was something they were supposed to protect. And somewhere in the past 12 hours, sitting across from Lena Whitaker in a small room above a garage, he had felt the faint, almost painful sensation of remembering what that something was. He closed the laptop. He had 2 calls to make, 3 threads to pull, 1 betrayal to confirm, and an operation to dismantle. He started with the calls. At 2 in the morning, exactly 24 hours after Lena had first whispered into his phone, Damien got the confirmation from Leo. Nico Ferreira had been taking money from a Vale Holdings shell account for 7 months. He had provided Vale's people with 3 separate pieces of information in the past week. The most recent, sent 4 hours ago, was a cross-street reference that was close to but not exactly the Astoria location. Close enough that someone looking would narrow it down within a few hours of checking. Damien called Carla. "You need to move, both of you. Right now." He heard Carla's sharp intake of breath. Then her voice dropped into the calm, businesslike register of someone who had been around enough to know that when Damien said "right now," he meant it. Where? He gave her an address, a location that had no connection to his name, his organization, or anyone who had ever met Nico Ferreira. "We'll be there in 40 minutes, Carla said. "Tell Lena to bring everything she's been working on. She already has it all packed. She packed it an hour ago." He stopped. "What?" "She told me she had a feeling things might need to move quickly." Carla's voice carried something in it. Something that sounded almost like admiration. She said she'd been wrong about which 48 hours were the safe ones before. She wasn't planning to be wrong again. Damien stood there for a moment with the phone in his hand. She had packed an hour ago, before he called, before he knew about Nico, before any of it. Because she had been managing emergencies for 4 years. Because she read rooms the way other people read books. Because she had survived 6 days of someone trying to find her by being 2 steps ahead of the moments when everything shifted. He had moved her, and she had already been ready to move. He did not know what to do with that. He hung up and stood in the dark of his office and understood something that he had been resisting understanding for almost 24 hours. This was not going to be resolved quietly. Vale had already moved to threaten him. Had already pulled someone inside his organization. Had already demonstrated that he was willing to reach further and act faster than a man trying to protect a legitimate business would need to. Which meant the evidence Lena had gathered was not just damaging. It was existential. Whatever was buried in those shadow records. Whatever pattern connected the 12 properties and the financial trail through Malta and Cyprus and Luxembourg, it was enough that Vale could not afford for it to surface through any channel that he did not control. That changed everything about how this had to be handled. Damien Moretti had 2 choices. He could step back, hand the USB drive to someone with the power to use it, and let the system run its course. Walk away, protect his operation, do the logical thing. Or he could stay in. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, not because any calculation of cost and benefit pointed in that direction, but because Lena Whitaker had said the name Walter Drain like it mattered. And because, for the first time in a very long time, Damien Moretti was listening to something other than the math. He picked up his phone. He had a long night ahead of him. And he was, for the first time in years, completely certain about which direction he was moving. The new location was a third-floor walk-up in Woodside belonging to a retired schoolteacher named Dominic, who owed Damien a favor so old that neither of them talked about it anymore. Lena walked in, looked at the two rooms, looked at the single window with the broken latch, and said, "Is there a desk?" Carla pointed to the kitchen table. Lena set her bag down and opened her laptop. She did not ask questions about why they had moved. She did not ask about the source of the breach. She simply recalibrated and kept going, the way she always kept going, with the quiet relentlessness of someone who has decided that stopping is the only option she refuses to take. Carla caught Damien's eye across the room and gave him a look that said, without any words at all, "This one is something else." He knew. He left them there and went back to work. By 4 a.m, the picture had a new dimension. The journalist, her name was Rachel Morrow, and she had a voice like cut glass and an instinct for corruption that Damien had always found almost frightening in its accuracy, had reviewed the financial summary he sent and called him back within the hour. "This is not a real estate story," she said, the moment he answered. No greeting. "You understand that, right? This is a money laundering operation that uses real estate as the mechanism. The property acquisitions are secondary. The primary function is moving capital through a series of legitimate-looking transactions to obscure its origin. Vale is not a developer who occasionally does dirty things. He's a laundering vehicle who uses development as cover." Damien was quiet for a moment. "Whose money?" "That," Rachel said, "is the question that is going to require some time to answer. But the structure of the Luxembourg account, the specific bank, the specific holding instrument, I've seen that pattern before. In an investigation that was killed 3 years ago. Killed from above, before it ever saw print." Her voice dropped slightly. "The money coming through Vale isn't local, Damien. This is not a story about a corrupt New York developer. This is significantly larger than that." He sat with that for the length of a full breath. "How much time do you need to confirm the source?" "Weeks. Maybe more." A pause. "To establish enough of a trail to take it to print with solid sourcing. I can have a framework in 72 hours if I work without sleeping." "Work without sleeping," he said. She hung up without answering, which meant yes. He set the phone down. Larger than a corrupt New York developer. He thought about Marcus Vale standing at charity galas, with a glass of champagne, smiling at cameras, putting his name on hospital wings. He thought about the careful, measured voice on the phone earlier that night, the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable, not because he had built good defenses, but because what he was protecting was connected to something so large. That touching it meant touching everything above it. And then he thought about Lena Whitaker, sitting in a kitchen in Woodside, going through shadow records from a city dispatch system, who had stumbled into all of this because she read the technical documentation when she started her job. The thing about truly dangerous secrets Damien had learned over a lifetime of operating near them was that they were never discovered by people who were looking for them. They were always discovered by accident, by someone who was simply doing their job carefully, who followed a thread because something did not add up, who kept pulling because their instinct said the number should match. And the people who kept those secrets never truly feared the investigators. They feared the careful, ordinary, persistent people who did not know what they were not supposed to find. He needed to get to Lena. He arrived in Woodside at 5:30 in the morning. She was still at the kitchen table, the laptop screen reflected in her eyes. She had a pen in her hand and the notebook open beside her, and she was cross-referencing something with the intensity of a person defusing something that might go off if she moved too quickly. Carla was asleep in the other room. Damien sat down across from Lena and said, "I need to tell you something." She looked up, read his face, set the pen down. "Tell me." He told her what Rachel had said, the laundering structure, the Luxembourg account, the investigation killed 3 years ago. He told her all of it, in the same flat, precise way he told himself things when the situation required clarity over comfort. Lena listened without moving. When he finished, She was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Who is the money coming from? We don't know yet. But it's not Vale's. No, Vale is the mechanism, not the source." Another silence. So when I stumbled onto those deleted records, she said slowly, "I wasn't just finding evidence that a developer was eliminating obstacles. I was finding the edge of something much bigger that Vale is protecting for someone else. That's what it looks like." She looked at her laptop. Then back at him. Something moved across her face, not fear exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has just understood that the problem they thought they were solving is a much smaller problem than the one underneath it. "How much danger am I in?" she said, accurately, not reassuringly. He respected the distinction. "More than yesterday," he said. "Not because of what you know, because of what you found the edge of. If whoever is behind the money decides that Vale's exposure risk is too high, they don't clean up Vale," she said. "They clean up everything connected to the exposure." Yes, she absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, watched the processing happen behind her eyes, the rapid, disciplined recalibration that had been keeping her functional for a week. "Okay," she said. "Lena, I'm not falling apart." Her voice was steady. "I just need a second to adjust the map." She looked at him directly. "You said there was an investigation 3 years ago that was killed before it went to print. Who was the journalist?" "Someone named Rachel Morrow. She's working the financial thread now." Rachel Morrow. Something shifted in her expression. "She won a Polk Award 4 years ago for a series on offshore banking structures in the Caribbean." She paused. "She knows what she's looking at." "Yes. Then the financial piece is in good hands." Lena picked up the pen again. "Which means what I need to focus on is the operational piece. The on-the-ground evidence. The dispatch records are proof of method. They show how Vale's operation works at the street level. That's different from the financial evidence. That's the human cost." Her voice went level and deliberate. "Patricia Howe, Walter Drain, the witnesses who were erased and relocated. Those are not footnotes to the financial story. They are the story. And I want to make sure that when this goes public, it doesn't get reduced to a wire transfer investigation." Damien looked at her. "You're still thinking about them," he said. "I never stopped," she said simply. And then she was writing again. He sat there in the quiet of the kitchen, watching a woman who had every reason in the world to focus only on her own survival, spend her energy making sure the people who had already been hurt would not be forgotten in the telling. He did not have words for what that did to something inside him. So he did what he always did when he did not have words. He went to work. The betrayal broke open at noon. Leo called. His voice had the particular controlled flatness that meant what he was about to say was bad enough that he was managing himself carefully before delivering it. "Nico didn't just give them the cross street," Leo said. "He gave them her name, full name, and the connection to you, a beat. 2 days ago." Damien went very still. 2 days ago, he repeated. "Before you moved her to the Astoria place, he gave them everything he had at that point. Which means Vale's people have known who she is and who she's with since before you set up the first location." The implication landed with complete clarity. They had not found the Astoria location through the cross-street reference. They had been tracking backward from the moment Nigo made that call. The information sent hours ago was not how they had nearly found Lena. It was a confirmation of something they had already been building. "How long before they find the Woodside address?" Damien asked. "If they're working it systematically, maybe 6 hours. Maybe less. Find Nico. Lock him down. Don't let him make another call. Already done. He's been sitting with 2 of our guys for the last hour. Doesn't know why yet. Keep it that way until I get back." He went directly to the kitchen. Lena looked up the moment he walked in. She read his face again. She did this constantly. This rapid assessment. This instant translation of what she saw into what it meant. And she said, "How much time do we have?" 6 hours. Maybe less. "We need to move again." Okay, she was already closing the laptop. "Where?" "Not one of my locations. Not anything connected to my organization." He was running through options. "I need somewhere completely outside the network. Somewhere that has no link to me, no link to you, no..." link to anyone either of us has spoken to in the past week. Lena stopped moving. He looked at her. I have somewhere, she said carefully. Who? My aunt. She lives in Bayside. She's 71 years old, and she's been offline since 2019 because she had a bad experience with social media and deleted every account she had. She pays her bills in cash. She has no smartphone. Her landline is registered under her late husband's name. She looked at him steadily. There is no digital record of our relationship because there is no digital record of her. And Vale's people cannot find me through a woman who does not exist on the internet. Damien considered this for 3 seconds. Can you call her without using your cell? Carla has a burner. Call her. Tell her you need somewhere to stay for a few days. Don't tell her anything else. Lena nodded and moved toward the other room. Then she stopped. The person who gave us up, she said. She did not turn around. It was someone in your organization. Yes. How long had they been working for Vale? 7 months. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that means Vale knew about the exposure risk for at least that long. He had someone in place before my call to you. She turned around then. Damien, he wasn't just reacting to me. He's been building a counterintelligence layer for months. Watching for exactly this kind of threat. He had already arrived at this conclusion. Hearing her say it confirmed it. Which means, she continued, that this is not the first time someone has gotten close. Rachel's investigation 3 years ago. Whoever triggered that. There were others before me, and Vale shut them all down. Her voice dropped slightly. He's going to try to shut us down the same way. He's going to try, Damien said. Something in his voice made her go still. You have a plan, she said. I have the beginning of one. Tell me. He looked at her for a moment. At the dark circles and the steady hands and the eyes that were tired and completely alert at the same time. Not yet, he said. Right now the plan is to get you to Bayside. Everything else waits until you're somewhere safe. She held his gaze long enough to let him know she had noted the deflection. Then she went to wake Carla. The drive to Bayside took 40 minutes. Damien did not go himself. He sent Carla and a driver he trusted in a car that was registered to neither of them. He stayed back and worked the problem from a different angle because the most useful thing he could do for Lena right now was not to be physically present, but to be operationally ahead. He met with the former federal prosecutor at 1 o'clock. Her name was Diana Chen. She was 53, wore her hair in the same blunt cut she'd had for 20 years, and had a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being weighed for evidentiary value. She had left the Southern District of New York 8 years ago and gone into private practice, but she still had relationships inside the DOJ and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit that were built on 15 years of working cases together. She read the summary Damien had prepared. Read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at him. This is not something I can take to my former colleagues informally, she said. If I walk into Maine Justice with something this size, it either has full documentation attached or it disappears into a review committee and never comes out. The documentation exists. I need to see it. How quickly can you move once you have it? She considered, if the shadow records are as complete as you're describing, and if Rachel's financial analysis corroborates the timing, I can take this to a contact in financial crimes who will treat it seriously. Not the local field office, they have too many relationships in this city that could create problems. I'm thinking Maine Justice, or possibly the Southern District of New York's Public Corruption Unit. How long before Vale would know it's moving through those channels? 48 hours if we're careful, possibly less. She looked at him levelly. He has contacts inside the system, Damien. You know that. I know. Which means this has to move fast enough that he can't get to it before it's in enough hands that killing it becomes impossible. She folded her hands on the table. I need the documentation in my hands today, and I need the primary source, the woman who found this to be somewhere that cannot be reached. She's being moved as we speak, and she's willing to provide a formal statement. He thought about Lena Whitaker, who had packed her bag an hour before he called because she had a feeling things might need to move quickly. Who had maintained a dead man's switch from the beginning. Who said the names of the victims like they were people. Yes, he said, she's willing. Diana nodded once. Then get me the documentation. And Damien, she stopped him as he stood. Be careful about who knows this is moving. At this level, the risk is not just from Vale. It's from whoever is above him. And we don't know yet how high that goes. He left the meeting and called Rachel. Where are you on the source? Closer than I expected. Her voice had the tightly controlled energy of someone who had been mainlining coffee and following a thread that kept opening into something larger. The Luxembourg Bank has been flagged twice in EU financial intelligence reports in the past 5 years. Both times the flag was downgraded before it reached prosecution level. The money coming into Vale's accounts originates from a network of shell companies registered across 3 Eastern European jurisdictions. A pause. Damien. The capital moving through Vale's operation, the amounts I'm tracking, are not developer money. We're talking about figures that suggest organized capital flight on a significant scale. He let her finish. How significant, he said. In the past 4 years, through the accounts I can track, over $300 million. The number sat in the air. Published when, he said. I need 48 more hours for sourcing. Then I can go to my editor. Another pause. But Damien, if this publishes before the legal action is in place, Vale gets a window to move the money and disappear the trail. It has to coordinate. I'm working on that. I'll call you in 6 hours. He hung up. $300 million. Walter Drain's building had sold for $4.2 million after the fire. Patricia Howe's testimony withdrawal had been worth, in property terms, the uncontested passage of a zoning variance that enabled a development valued at $68 million. Maria Fontaine, who had seen 2 men leave a building in the middle of the night, had been worth the price of a moving van and a P.O. box in Nevada. $300 million moved through the city, cleaned through development deals, protected by deleted dispatch records, built on the lives of ordinary people who had the misfortune of being in the way. Damien Moretti had done many things in his life that he could not undo. He knew that. He had never pretended otherwise. He carried it the way you carry a weight you have stopped noticing, only because you have grown so accustomed to it being there. But this, the mechanism of what Vale had built, the specific human cost of it, the careful and systematic erasure of people who simply refused to move this, was something that settled in him differently. He called Leo. Bring Nico to me, he said. Nico Ferreira was 26 years old and looked right now significantly younger than that. He sat across from Damien in the back office of a legitimate restaurant in Long Island City that Damien had owned for 9 years. He was pale. His hands were clasped on the table in front of him with the rigid stillness of someone trying very hard not to let them shake. Damien did not perform anger. He never had. Anger was something people displayed when they wanted the other person to feel the weight of what they had done. He was not interested in Nico feeling the weight. He was interested in what Nico knew. 7 months, Damien said. Nico said nothing. 7 months. You've been passing information. I need to know everything you gave them, not the general shape of it. Specifically, every call, every message, every piece of information you provided, and when. Nico looked at the table. Nico, Damien's voice did not rise. It dropped slightly, which was worse, and Nico knew it. I'm not going to ask twice. They came to me, Nico said. His voice was quiet, strained. The voice of someone who has been living with something terrible for long enough that the relief of saying it aloud is almost indistinguishable from the horror. 7 months ago, one of Vale's fixers. He said they just wanted to know about general movement. Nothing operational, just who came in and out, what meetings happened. He swallowed. They said it was just business intelligence, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. And the money. A pause, yes, how much? 8,000. Total. Over the 7 months, he finally looked up. His eyes were wet. I know how that sounds. What did you give them about Lena Whitaker, specifically? Her name, the connection to you, the Astoria cross streets. He stopped. That's all I had. I didn't know the specific address. And they found it anyway. I didn't know they would. I didn't know she was. He stopped again. Differently this time. Like something had just completed a circuit in his thinking. They were going to hurt her. Yes, Damien said. They were. Nico's face did something complicated. Damien watched it happen, the way understanding arrives not as information, but as physical weight. The way a person looks when they realize the thing they told themselves was harmless had a body attached to it. Is she? She's alive, no thanks to what you provided. Damien stood. You're going to write down every contact you had with Vale's people. Every communication. Dates, times, what was said. Everything. My lawyers will tell you what to do with it. Nico blinked. Your lawyers. You're going to provide testimony, Damien said. About how Vale's operation recruits informants and what they ask for and how they pay. That information has value to people who are currently building something that needs to include that layer. Nico stared at him. Why would you? Because what you know is more useful than what happens to you, Damien said flatly. Don't mistake that for forgiveness. He walked out. The call from Bayside came at 4 in the afternoon. Carla's voice. Steady, but something underneath it that made Damien's hand tighten on the phone before she even spoke. She's here. Safe. The aunt is she's good, she's fine. She welcomed her without asking questions. A pause. But Lena found something. What? She was going through the shadow records again. Looking at the metadata on the deletion and the timestamps on when the primary logs were scrubbed. Carla's voice dropped. The first deletion happened 14 months ago, the Walter Drain incident. But there's a deletion event 2 months before that. From a completely separate incident. An emergency call that doesn't match any of the property records Lena had mapped. Damien went very still. What kind of emergency call? It was a welfare check request, Carla said, from a woman in Bay Ridge. She was calling about her neighbor. She said she had heard 2 men in the hallway, and sounds she was afraid to describe. Carla paused again. The call was routed. A unit was dispatched, but the follow-up record was deleted the same way as the others. And the neighbor she called about. Give me the name. Margaret Vale, Carla said, reported as the wife of Marcus Vale. The address was a Bay Ridge property that Vale has never publicly disclosed as a personal residence. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Damien said, Don't let Lena go anywhere. I'll be there in an hour. Carla's voice was careful, deliberately careful. She already pulled the address from the city property records. She already knows what the property is. I know. She's not going to sit still with this. I know that too. He was already moving. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I need her to stay exactly where she is until I get there. He was out the door before Carla could respond. Because what Lena had found was not just another thread in the pattern. It was the thread that changed everything. If Marcus Vale had used his own operations method to delete a welfare check at his own private residence, if the same mechanism that had protected $300 million in laundered capital had also been used to make a single emergency call about his home address disappear, then whoever had made that call and whatever they had heard in that hallway was not a property dispute. It was personal, and personal, in Damien's experience, was where people made the kinds of mistakes that brought everything down. He pressed the accelerator and drove. Behind him, New York fell away. Ahead of him, something that had started with a whispered phone call in the dark was about to become something none of them could walk back from. He drove faster. Lena was at the kitchen table when Damien walked in. She had the laptop open and the notebook beside it and 3 separate browser tabs running, and she was writing so fast that the pen was making small tears in the paper. Her aunt, a small, bright-eyed woman named Ruth, who smelled like lavender and moved like someone who had decided a long time ago that worrying was a waste of good hours, had put a plate of food next to the laptop that Lena had not touched. Damien sat down. Lena did not look up. Margaret Vale, she said. Married Marcus Vale 11 years ago. Former elementary school teacher. No criminal record, no public profile. She doesn't attend his events. She's not in any of his foundation photographs. She doesn't exist in his public life at all. She turned the laptop toward him. I found one photograph. From a restaurant in Bay Ridge, taken by a local food blogger 3 years ago. Background. She's sitting at a corner table alone. Lena stopped. She looks like someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Damien looked at the photograph. A woman in her early 40s. Dark hair, a posture that was technically upright but had something folded about it. Something practiced about the way she was arranged. The welfare check, he said. The call came in at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. The neighbor who called her name is Rosa Mendez. She still lives 2 floors below the Bay Ridge address. She told the dispatcher she heard a woman crying and then a sound she described as something heavy falling. She said it wasn't the first time. Lena's voice was precise and careful, the way it got when she was managing what the information was doing to her. The shadow record shows a unit was dispatched. They arrived at 12:07. The door was answered by Marcus Vale. He told the officers his wife had fallen and refused medical assistance on her behalf. The officers logged it and left. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Opened them. The primary record was deleted 4 days later. Routed through the same administrative access that deleted the drain incident records. The silence in the kitchen was complete. He used the same system, Damien said. The same access credentials. The same deletion method. Whoever he had inside the dispatch system didn't just work for him professionally. They helped him keep what was happening in his own home invisible. Lena's voice did not waver, but her hand, resting on the table beside the notebook, pressed flat against the surface with a force that was not casual. Rosa Mendez never made another call. I think she was told to stop. I need to talk to Rosa Mendez, Damien said. I know. And I need to talk to Margaret Vale. Lena looked at him. She may not talk. Women in that situation, it's not simple. It's never simple. There are 1,000 reasons why. I know, he said. But she made one call. 11 years of marriage and she made one call, and someone made sure that call disappeared. He held Lena's gaze. She deserves to know that someone found it. Something moved across Lena's face. Something that cracked slightly in its edges, and then steadied. Yes, she said quietly. She does. Ruth appeared from the other room, took one look at both of them, and put on a kettle without saying a word. The small, ordinary sounds of it filled the kitchen, water running, the click of the stove, and for a moment the world contracted to just that room, and those sounds and the weight of everything they were carrying. Damien's phone rang. Leo. We have a problem, Leo said. Those 4 words from Leo meant something specific. Leo did not use the word problem casually. He used it when something had moved past manageable into the territory that required decisions Damien would not want to make. Tell me, Vale is not waiting anymore. He reached out to 2 of our distribution partners in the past 3 hours. Told them he's aware of a situation involving our organization and a certain missing city employee. Implied that doing business with us in the current climate carried elevated risk. A pause. He's not threatening us directly. He's poisoning the well. Trying to isolate us operationally. How much damage? Carbone pulled out. Said he needs to pause the arrangement, pending clarification. Reyes hasn't responded to calls. Another pause. If Vale makes the same call to 4 more partners, we start having functional problems within the week. Damien absorbed this. Vale was not coming at him frontally. He was doing what careful, controlled men did when they could not use force directly. He was applying economic pressure through relationships, the slow strangulation of someone's ability to operate. It was patient, it was intelligent, and it was designed to make Damien calculate the cost of continuing and decide it was too high. How long can we absorb it before it becomes critical? 10 days. Maybe 12 if we're careful. That's enough, Damien said. Damien, 10 days is enough. Keep the partners who are still in. Don't chase the ones who aren't. And Leo, start pulling everything we have on Vale's legitimate business relationships. His board members, his institutional investors, his foundation donors. He paused. He applies pressure through relationships. So do we. Leo was quiet for a moment. Then, you're going after him publicly. I'm going after him completely, Damien said. There's a difference. He hung up. Lena was watching him. How bad, she said. Manageable. He said it without hesitation, not to reassure her because it was true. 10 days was enough. He just needed everything to move in the next 48 hours faster than Vale expected. I heard the word partners, she said. He's going after your business. Yes, because of me. Because of what you found, he said. There's a difference. She studied his face. You keep saying that. There's a difference. Because there is. You didn't create this situation. You uncovered one that already existed. He met her eyes. Vale has been operating this way for a decade. He was always going to do damage. The only question was whether anyone ever made it cost him something. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry about your business. Don't be. Damien, I said don't be. His voice was not harsh. It was simply final. I made a choice when I decided to stay in this. I don't need you to apologize for me making it. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he felt it, the directness of her attention, the way she looked at him like she was reading something he had not written out loud. Okay, she said, and went back to the laptop. Rosa Mendez opened her door on the third knock. She was somewhere in her late 60s, with careful eyes and the posture of a woman who had learned to assess the space before she walked into it. She looked at Damien, then at Leo, who was standing 2 steps back. Then she started to close the door. Mrs. Mendez, Damien said it quietly. I'm not here from anyone connected to Marcus Vale. I'm here because of a phone call you made 3 years ago that was deleted from the city's records. I'm here because someone found it. She stopped. The door did not open further. But it did not close. Someone found it, she repeated. Her voice was flat, careful, the voice of a woman who had been careful for a long time. A dispatcher named Lena Whitaker. She works for the city's emergency system. She found your call in the Shadow Archive and she traced it back. He paused. She wanted you to know someone heard you. The door opened. Rosa Mendez had the kind of face that had been through things and not looked away from them. She stood in her doorway and looked at Damien with eyes that were assessing and exhausted, and somewhere underneath both of those things, quietly furious. I made 2 calls, she said. The first night, and then again 3 weeks later when I heard it again. The second call, they didn't even dispatch anyone. Someone called me back the next morning. A man who said he was from the city's community liaison office. He said my concerns had been reviewed and determined to be a private matter. He suggested I focus on my own household. She stopped. I knew what that meant. What did you do? I moved my ceramic elephant collection away from the wall we shared, she said. So I wouldn't hear. So I couldn't be asked to decide again what to do about something nobody wanted me to see. She paused. I've been moving things away from that wall for 3 years. Damien said nothing. Is she still there? Rosa asked. Her voice dropped. Margaret, I believe so. Rosa looked at him for a long time. She brought me tomatoes once, from her balcony plants. She grew tomatoes. A pause. She apologized for the smell of the fertilizer. She always apologized for everything. He had nothing to say to that. What do you need from me? Rosa said. A statement. What you heard. The call you made. The follow-up call you received. Signed and witnessed. He held her gaze. You won't have to speak publicly unless you choose to. But having your account in writing gives us something we need. Rosa Mendez stood in her doorway for the length of a full breath. Then she stepped back and opened the door all the way. Come in, she said. I'll make coffee. The statement took 40 minutes. Rosa was precise, methodical. She remembered dates, times, the specific words the man from the so-called community liaison office had used. She had written some of it down in a personal journal at the time, not because she thought it would matter, but because, as she said simply, when something terrible happens and nobody else will remember it, you remember it yourself. She brought out the journal without being asked. Damien photographed every relevant page. When they were done, Rosa walked him to the door. She stopped him with one hand on his arm, a light touch, brief but deliberate. The woman who found the call, she said. Is she safe? I'm working on it. Rosa nodded slowly. Tell her she stopped. Started again. Tell her that someone spent 3 years moving furniture away from a wall because she was afraid to know something she already knew. Tell her that matters. Tell her that people like me, we remember every person who chose not to look away. He drove back to Bayside with Rose's journal pages, and the weight of her words and a clarity about what needed to happen next that was so sharp it felt almost like pain. Diana Chen reviewed the full documentation package at 7 that evening. She sat at the table in the Bayside kitchen. Ruth had materialized sandwiches at some point and then retreated with the precise instinct of a woman who understood when to be present and when to leave people to their work, and she read everything. The shadow records, the financial summary, the timeline Lena had constructed. Nico's written account, Rose's statement. When she finished, she set the last page down. She did not speak immediately. Lena was watching her. Damien was watching Lena, and Ruth, from the hallway, was pretending to arrange something on a shelf that did not need arranging. "This is enough," Diana said finally. "Not just enough to open an investigation. Enough to seek emergency asset preservation orders on the Vale Holdings accounts while the investigation proceeds." She looked at Lena. "The shadow records are the spine. They establish the method. Everything else builds on them." She paused. "But I need to be direct with you both about what happens the moment I file this." "He'll know," Damien said. "Within hours. The contacts he has, inside the system, I can route around most of them, but not all. The moment this hits the Southern District, Vale will have some form of notification. That gives him a window." Diana looked at Lena. "Are you prepared for what that window might mean?" Lena said, "He'll try to move the money. The asset preservation order will block the known accounts. But if he has structures we haven't mapped," Rachel Morrow, Damien said. "Her financial analysis goes to print coordinated with your filing. The moment it's public, any financial institution holding Vale's accounts that hasn't already been served with a preservation order will freeze voluntarily rather than face exposure." Diana looked at him. "You coordinated with a journalist." "I coordinated with someone who has been trying to publish this story for 3 years and had it killed. She has the sourcing, she has the documentation, and she has an editor who is ready to move the moment she gets confirmation that the legal filing is active." Diana was quiet for a moment. "That's not how federal investigations typically coordinate with media." "No," Damien said, "it's not." Another pause. Then the corner of Diana's mouth moved slightly. "File time is 8 a.m. tomorrow. Tell your journalist to be ready." Lena let out a breath so controlled it was barely visible. But Damien was close enough to hear it, close enough to know what it cost her to hold everything together this long, and what that small exhale meant. He did not say anything, but he noticed. The call came at 11:53 p.m. Not to Damien's phone, to Lena's burner, the number only Carla and Ruth knew. Lena answered it on the second ring and went completely still. Damien saw her face change. Not break. Lena Whitaker did not break. But something drained out of it, the color and the carefully maintained steadiness, replaced by something pale and rigid that he had not seen on her before. She said, "How did you get this number?" A pause. Then she looked at Damien. She put the call on speaker. The voice that came through was a woman's. Quiet, slightly unsteady but trying not to be. The voice of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was now discovering that rehearsal and reality are not the same thing. "My name is Margaret Vale," the woman said. Lena closed her eyes for 1 second. "Margaret," she said carefully, "how did you get this number?" "Rosa," Margaret said. "Rosa Mendez. She called me this afternoon. She said someone had come to see her. She said," a breath. Audible. Effortful. "She said someone found the call. From 3 years ago." Another pause. "She gave me this number." The kitchen was so quiet that Damien could hear Ruth stop moving in the other room. "Margaret," Lena said. Her voice had shifted not to the brisk controlled register she used for information, to something softer, more direct, the voice she had used the very first night on the phone when she was afraid, except now she was not the one who was afraid. "Are you somewhere safe right now?" The word caught. "I'm at the Bay Ridge apartment. He's not here. He has a dinner tonight. A foundation event. He won't be back until after midnight." Less than an hour. Damien was already on his feet. "I need to ask you something," Lena said. She was looking at Damien as she said it, her eyes tracking his movement and calibrating in real time. "And I need you to answer me honestly, because what you tell me right now matters very much. Have you heard Marcus talking about a woman named Lena Whitaker in the past week? Or about documents? Or about someone finding records from the city's dispatch system? A long pause. Yes, Margaret said. Lena kept her voice even. What did you hear? He was on the phone. 2 nights ago. Late. He didn't know I was awake. Another breath. He said that the problem needed to be resolved completely. He said that halfway measures had already cost him too much. The voice dropped. He said the woman needed to disappear, that whatever it took. The words landed in the kitchen like stones. Lena did not react visibly. But her hand found the edge of the table and held it. Margaret, Lena's voice was steady, completely steady. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Inapproximately, she looked at Damien, who held up 7 fingers, 7 hours. A federal legal filing is going to be submitted that begins the formal process of investigating your husband's financial activities. When that happens, his world is going to change very fast. And I need to know that before that happens, you are somewhere other than that apartment. Silence. You want me to leave, Margaret said. I want you to be safe, Lena said. Those are the same thing right now. The voice broke slightly, then gathered itself. I've tried to leave before. It's not simple. I know, Lena said. I know it's not simple, and I'm not asking you to explain yourself to me or justify anything. I'm asking you to make one decision tonight. Just this one. Can you get yourself out of that apartment in the next 30 minutes? A very long pause. Then where would I go? Lena looked at Damien. He was already on the phone with Leo. I'm going to give you an address, Lena said. And someone will meet you there. Someone I trust. You will be safe. She paused. Margaret, I found your call. 3 years ago, you picked up a phone when everything in you must have been saying that nobody would help. I found it. I heard you. And tonight I'm asking you to pick up the phone one more time. The silence lasted long enough that Damien stopped breathing. Then Margaret Vale said, Okay, and the words sounded like someone opening a door they had thought was permanently sealed. Lena read her the address of a location. Leo had already identified a domestic violence shelter affiliated with a legal advocacy organization that Diana Chen had worked with during her time at the Southern District. A place with no visible connection to Damien, to his organization, or to anything Marcus Vale would know to look at. She stayed on the phone with Margaret for 12 more minutes, talking her through the steps, what to bring, what not to stop for, which exit to use, the steady, calm, procedural clarity of someone who had spent 4 years talking frightened people through their worst moments. Damien sat across the table and listened. He had heard her on that very first call, whispering, terrified, asking him not to hang up. He had watched her work through 6 days of being hunted. He had seen her pack before he called. He had seen her write in margins when she ran out of pages. But watching her talk Margaret Vale out of that apartment quietly, firmly, without drama, with only the absolute conviction that the woman on the other end of that phone deserved to be heard, was something different. It was the moment he understood, completely and without reservation, that Lena Whitaker was the bravest person he had been in the same room with in a very long time. Not because she was fearless. She was not fearless. Because she was afraid and she did it anyway, every single time. Margaret arrived at the shelter at 12:47 a.m. Leo's driver confirmed it with a single text. Lena read the text and set down the phone. For a moment she did nothing, just sat with it. The kitchen was quiet. Ruth had gone to sleep. Damien was across the table. Then Lena said, She's out. Yes, she's safe, for now. She will be more safe in approximately 7 hours. Lena looked at her hands on the table. He said I needed to disappear. Those words specifically, yes. And instead, his wife disappeared. She said it without satisfaction. Just as a fact. The particular fact of a night that had moved in ways none of them had controlled. Get some sleep, Damien said. You need to be sharp tomorrow. I'm not sure I can sleep. Try. She looked at him. The exhaustion was there, completely visible now, in the set of her jaw and the heaviness around her eyes. But underneath it something else, something that was not quite relief and not quite peace, but was in that direction. The look of someone who has been carrying something enormous and has just discovered that the carrying is almost over. Damien. She said his name with the particular weight she sometimes gave it. Like a period at the end of a sentence. Why did you stay in this, honestly? You could have handed everything to Diana 3 days ago and walked away. He considered not answering. Then he thought about Walter Drain. About Rosa Mendez moving her ceramic elephants away from the wall. About Margaret Vale growing tomatoes on a balcony and apologizing for the fertilizer smell. About Lena herself whispering "don't hang up in the dark," not because she expected to be saved, but because she was trying to give one honest person a chance to make a different choice. Because someone asked me not to hang up, he said. And I decided to listen. Lena was very still. That's the whole answer, she said. That's the whole answer. She held his gaze for a moment. Then something in her face did a thing he had not seen it do before. Not the controlled steadiness. Not the exhausted precision. Something quieter and more unguarded than either. Thank you, she said. Not dramatically. Not with the weight of everything she meant by it, though he could hear that underneath it. Just 2 words, said directly, by a woman who had learned that when something matters, you say it plainly. He nodded once. Sleep, he said. She almost smiled. Okay, she said. At 3 a.m, Damien sat alone at the kitchen table with his phone and the remains of the coffee Ruth had made 4 hours ago, and he did something he had not done in more years than he could accurately count. He thought about who he had been, not with nostalgia, not with regret exactly, more with the strange, clarifying awareness of someone who has been handed, unexpectedly, a mirror. He had been 22 when he made his first real choice. Not the choice everyone assumed was the money, the territory, the early alliances. Those were consequences of the real first choice, which was simpler and older, the choice to stop believing that the world was going to be fair to people who were not willing to take what they needed. He had built everything that came after on that belief. And it was not wrong exactly. The world was not fair. He had been right about that. But somewhere in the building, in the acquiring, in the defending and the maintaining, he had let that belief become a wall. Not just protection, isolation. The kind of distance from the human cost of things that allows a person to operate efficiently and without friction. Lena had no such distance. She had none. It had never occurred to her to build any. She sat in the middle of other people's emergencies and felt them and answered them, and then she found evidence of an old man burned out of his apartment, and she wrote his name in the margins of a notebook at 3 a.m. because she was running out of pages. He did not know what to do with that. He did not know what to do with any of what the past 4 days had done to something in his chest that he had been successfully ignoring for the better part of a decade. What he knew was that in 4 hours, Diana Chen was going to walk into the Southern District with a package that would begin the process of dismantling Marcus Vale's operation. Rachel Morrow was going to publish. The evidence that Lena had found in the shadow archive of a city dispatch system was going to be in enough hands, moving through enough channels, that Vale's ability to make it disappear would be gone. And Lena Whitaker, who had called a stranger in the dark with nothing but her voice and her refusal, was going to be safe. He was going to make sure of that, not because it was strategic, not because it served his interests, but because some things were simply true, and this was one of them. When someone handed you their trust in the dark, with nothing holding them up but the belief that you might actually hear them, you answered. Every time. You answered. His phone buzzed. Rachel Morrow, ready to go. Waiting on your word. He typed back 3 words. Tomorrow morning. Go. He set the phone down. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Breathing and moving and carrying its ordinary weight through the dark hours before dawn. He sat in the quiet of Ruth's kitchen and thought about a woman sleeping down the hall who had packed her bag before he called, because she trusted her own instincts about when things were about to move. He thought about a phone ringing at 2:13 in the morning. He thought about the choice he had made when he answered it. And for the first time in a very long time, Damien Moretti felt something he did not have a ready word for. Something between clarity and grief, and the particular sensation of a door opening in a wall you had forgotten was a wall. He sat with it, Outside, the first pale edge of morning was beginning to press against the dark. And inside, something that had been closing for years was, very quietly, beginning to open. The filing hit the Southern District at 8:04 in the morning. Dianta Chen walked through those doors with a 47-page package, 3 encrypted drives, and the particular expression of a woman who has been waiting a long time to do something and is doing it now with complete intention. She had 2 colleagues with her. She had called ahead to the one contact inside the public corruption unit she trusted without reservation, a senior prosecutor named Ellis, who had worked financial crimes for 19 years and had the reputation of someone who did not drop things once he picked them up. Ellis was waiting. He read the executive summary while Diana stood across from him. He read it once. Then he went back to page 1 and read it again. When he looked up, he said, "How solid are the shadow records? Original system architecture. Unaltered. The metadata confirms no modification since the initial logging date." Diana set the second drive on his desk. The financial analysis was compiled by Rachel Morrow. Her sourcing is attached. She publishes in 4 hours. Ellis picked up his phone. The asset preservation orders were filed by 9:15. Lena did not know any of this was happening yet. She had slept not well, not deeply, but genuinely, which was more than she had managed in a week. She woke at 7:30 to the sound of Ruth moving in the kitchen and the smell of actual breakfast being made, and for approximately 10 seconds she existed in the blurred, ordinary warmth of waking up in a safe place before everything that was real came back. She sat up, reached for the laptop, checked the encrypted message channel Damien had set up 2 days ago. One message, sent at 3:47 a.m. tomorrow morning. Go D. She stared at it. He had sent that at 3:47 in the morning, which meant he had been awake at 3:47 in the morning, making the call that set everything into motion, and he had not woken her. He had let her sleep. He had carried the last hours of waiting alone and let her rest. She did not know what to do with that. She set the laptop down and went to find him. He was at the kitchen table. He had not slept. She could see that immediately, the particular stillness of someone who has been in the same position for hours, thinking rather than resting. He had a coffee cup in front of him that had been refilled recently enough to still be steaming, and his phone was face up on the table, and he was looking at something in the middle distance that was not in the room. He looked up when she walked in. Diana filed at 8:04, he said. Asset preservation orders went through at 9:15. Rachel publishes at noon. Lena sat down. It's moving. It's moving. She looked at him, at the exhaustion he was not performing, because Damien Moretti never performed anything. At the steadiness underneath it that she had come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of a very long practice of not letting feeling interfere with what needed to be done. You were up all night, she said. There was work. After the work. A beat. After the work too, she did not push it. She understood that kind of night, the kind where the doing is finished and you are left alone with everything the doing was covering. She had had several of those nights herself in the past week. Ruth put a plate in front of each of them. Eat, Ruth said, in a tone that indicated this was not a suggestion. They ate. The first reaction came at 9:47. Damien's phone. Leo. Vale's lawyers filed an emergency motion to block the asset preservation order, Leo said. Judge Carver's court. They're claiming procedural irregularity in the filing. Carver, Damien said, I know. Judge Carver had been appointed 8 years ago. He had received $40,000 in charitable contributions to his re-election committee from a Vale Holding subsidiary 3 years back. Not illegal. Carefully structured to be not illegal. Just the way these things worked. How long can they delay with Carver? Damien asked. If Carver is sympathetic, he could issue a temporary stay on the preservation order that gives Vale a 48-hour window to move accounts before the motion is formally argued. 48 hours. Enough time to shift $300 million through structures that had been built precisely for this moment. Call Diana, Damien said. Now. He was already texting Rachel Morrow. Publication timeline, can you move to 10 a.m.? Rachel's response came in 40 seconds. Give me 30 minutes. He called Diana directly. Carver, he said the moment she answered. I know. I'm already on it. Her voice had the crisp, accelerated quality of someone who had anticipated this move and had a counter ready. I'm filing an emergency transfer motion to Judge Okafor's docket. It'll be contested, but I have grounds the Carver connection to Vale's charitable contributions creates an appearance of conflict that's strong enough to get a hearing. A pause. I need 90 minutes. You have 60, Damien said. Rachel publishes at 10. A short silence. Then tell her not to be late. He hung up and looked at Lena. She had been listening to his half of the conversation with the focused attention of someone who understood all of it. They're trying to use a friendly judge to create a window, she said. Yes, and if Rachel publishes before Vale can get the window open. Any financial institution holding his accounts that reads the story freezes voluntarily before he can move the money. The reputational risk alone makes them act faster than a court order. He held her gaze. That's why the publication has to go at 10. Lena understood. She had understood before he finished explaining. What do we do right now? She said. We wait, he said, and we stay by the phone. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not good at waiting. I know. How do you do it? He considered the question seriously. I think about what I can control, and I work on that. Everything else I let move at whatever speed it moves. She looked at him. And right now? What can you control right now? Making sure you have what you need to be ready when Diana calls and needs a statement confirmed. I'm ready for that. I know you are. The kitchen was quiet. Ruth had retreated to her garden with the serene discretion of a woman who understood that some conversations needed space, and that space was the most useful thing she could offer right now. Lena said, Margaret. Has there been any word? Leo checked in with the shelter at 7. She's there. She's safe. She spoke to one of their legal advocates last night. He paused. She asked if the woman who called her was okay. Lena's expression did something brief and difficult, and then settled. She asked about me, Lena said. She asked about you. Lena folded her hands on the table, looked at them. She grew tomatoes, she said quietly, on a balcony in Bay Ridge. And she apologized to her neighbor for the smell of the fertilizer. She looked up. That's the kind of person she is. And she spent 11 years inside that apartment with him. She's out now, Damien said. Because Rosa called her. Because Rosa told her someone had found the call. Lena's voice was careful. Precise. Carrying the weight of what she was saying, without letting it break. All of this, the cascade of it, started because I found a shadow record. Which I only found because I read the technical documentation when I started the job. Which I only did because my father taught me that if you're going to do something, you understand how it works. She shook her head slightly. If I hadn't read that documentation, if the shadow archive didn't exist, if Rosa hadn't kept her journal. But you did, Damien said. And it does, and she did. Yes. She looked at him. I know. I'm not spiraling. I'm just thinking about how thin it all was. How close it came to staying buried. Things that stay buried, Damien said. Stay buried because nobody looks. You looked. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you looked too. When you answered the phone. He had nothing to say to that. Not because it was untrue. Because it was true in a way that sat somewhere past the reach of the kind of language he was comfortable using. So he said nothing, and she let him say nothing, and somehow that was exactly right. Rachel Morrow published at 10:02 a.m. The piece ran 12,000 words with a full financial diagram, a timeline of the property acquisitions, reproductions of the Shadow Archive records with provenance documentation, Rosa Mendez's statement excerpted with her permission, and a comment from Marcus Vale's spokesperson that said the allegations were without merit and would be vigorously contested, a comment that by the time most people read it had already been overtaken by events. By 10:17, 3 separate financial institutions had placed voluntary holds on Vale Holdings accounts pending review. By 10:31, the emergency motion before Judge Carver was withdrawn. Damien never found out whether someone had called Carver's clerk with specific information about how the charitable contribution timeline would look in print, or whether Carver had simply read the article like everyone else and made a calculation. It did not matter. The motion was gone. By 11 a.m., the asset preservation orders were fully in effect. Diana called Damien at 11:12. "It's locked," she said. 3 words, delivered with the particular compressed satisfaction of someone who has been working toward a moment for hours, and has arrived at it. All accounts? The known structures. We'll keep working on the offshore layers that takes time. But the domestic capital is frozen. A pause. And Ellis wants a formal interview with your source. Ms. Whitaker, can you make that happen this week? Yes, Damien said. She'll be there. He hung up and looked at Lena. She had been watching his face. It's locked, he said. She closed her eyes. Not dramatically. Not with relief that performed itself for the room. Just privately, briefly, completely, the way someone closes their eyes when they have been holding something so tightly for so long that finally being able to release it requires a moment of privacy, even in a room with another person. When she opened them, they were wet. She did not try to manage that. She just let it be there. Walter Drain, she said quietly. Yes, he said. Patricia Howe. Yes. Maria Fontaine. Yes. She nodded, a single slow nod, not of satisfaction. Of something more complicated, the acknowledgement that justice, when it finally moves for people who were already hurt by the time it arrives. That the best it can do is be real, be public, be irrevocable. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. What happens now? What happened now was this. Marcus Vale was taken into federal custody at 2:17 in the afternoon. Not from his office, from the lobby of his foundation headquarters, where he had arrived for what his assistant had told him was a routine meeting with the board. He had walked in wearing a charcoal suit and the practiced, comfortable expression of a man who expected to be in control of every room he entered. He was not in control of that room. Leo texted Damien a single word when it happened. Done. Damien showed the text to Lena. She read it. Read it again. Set the phone down on the table. Then she picked up her own phone, her real phone, the one she had not used in 8 days because it was too exposed, and she turned it on for the first time. It took 40 seconds to reconnect to the network. Then it began filling with messages. She watched the notifications pile up without reading them. Her eyes were somewhere else. I need to go back, she said. Damien looked at her. To work, she said. Eventually. I need to go back to the dispatch center. She paused. I know there will be an investigation of the system. I know people will be looking at everything inside it. And I want to be there when that happens. I want to be the person who helps them understand what they're looking at. You don't have to decide that today, he said. I know. She looked at him. I'm not deciding it today. I'm just knowing it. Knowing what comes next. She paused. I've been running toward something for 8 days. It helps to know what I'm running toward when the running is over. He understood that, better than she might have expected. There will be testimony, he said. The federal interview this week. Probably more after that. It's going to be a long process. I know, and the people above Vale, whoever the money was coming from that investigation, is going to be separate, and it's going to take much longer. You may be called on again. I know that too. She looked at him directly. Are you going to be involved in that? Not formally. Formally? A pause. I know people who know how to move things through the right channels. When it's useful, I'll be useful. She held his gaze. And the rest of the time, he did not answer immediately. Not because he did not know the answer, because the answer was something he was still in the process of understanding what to do with. The rest of the time, he said carefully, I'm going to try to be less certain that the walls I built were all necessary. Lena was very still. Then she said, That's the most personal thing you've said to me in 4 days. Yes. I'm going to remember it. I assumed you would. And there it was again, the thing that happened when she almost smiled. The thing that was not quite a smile yet but was in that direction, and that Damien had started to recognize as the expression her face made when something landed exactly where it was aimed. Ruth served dinner at 6. All 4 of them at the table, Ruth, Carla, Lena. Damien eating actual food in an actual kitchen while the city outside went on doing what it did. The television in the other room was on, and they could hear faintly the sound of a news anchor saying Marcus Vale's name in the tone that news anchors used when a story had broken wide open and was still breaking. Nobody turned up the volume. They ate. Ruth talked about her garden, about the particular tomatoes she was trying this year and whether the soil was right. Carla talked about her nephew who had just started community college and was already calling her twice a week, asking for life advice she claimed she was not qualified to give. Lena laughed at that, a real laugh. The first fully unguarded sound Damien had heard from her that did not have any weight attached to it. He watched it happen. He thought, there she is. Not the woman who managed emergencies. Not the woman who ran on caffeine and refusal. Not the woman who whispered into a phone in the dark. The woman underneath all of that. The one who existed when the immediate danger was not pressing against every surface of every hour. She caught him watching. She did not look away. What? She said. Nothing. You're doing that thing where you look at something and file it without saying anything. I don't know what you mean, he said. You do it constantly, she said. Someone says something, and instead of responding, you just process it somewhere and move on. Like you're taking notes you're not planning to share. He considered this. Maybe I am. What are you filing right now? He held her gaze for a long moment. That you laugh differently when you're not afraid, he said. The table went quiet. Not uncomfortably. Ruth and Carla found reasons to look at their plates with the synchronized discretion of two women who had been paying close attention and knew exactly what they were witnessing. Lena held his gaze. How do I laugh when I'm afraid, she said. You don't, he said. That's how I know. She looked at him for a long time after that. Long enough that the dinner continued around them and the news kept murmuring from the other room and the city kept moving, and all of it was exactly as ordinary and exactly as extraordinary as it was. The twist came at 8:47 p.m. Diana Chen called Damien's private line. Not the operational number. The private one, the number that almost nobody had and that she had been given specifically for this case. He stepped away from the table. The Luxembourg account, Diana said. Ellis's team has been working the foreign layer since this afternoon. They ran the beneficial ownership structure through a treaty partner in the EU, a pause. Carefully measured, the kind of pause that precedes information that changes the shape of everything that came before it. The capital flowing through Vale's accounts. The source. Tell me, Damien said. It's not foreign organized crime. It's not offshore corporate flight capital. Diana's voice dropped slightly. Damien, the beneficial owner of the primary Luxembourg vehicle is a domestic private equity group. They're registered in Delaware. They have a board of 7 directors. 3 of them currently hold advisory positions in state government. Another pause. One of them is the governor's chief economic advisor. The hallway was very quiet. How deep does it go? Damien said. We don't know yet. Ellis is treating this as a separate investigation from the Vale case. It's going to be sealed. It's going to be slow. Diana's voice was careful. Precise. The voice of someone who has understood that what they are holding is significantly heavier than what they were handed originally. The important thing right now is that the Vale case is fully intact and moving forward. What's behind it? That's a longer road. Does Lena know about this layer? No. It wasn't in the documentation she provided. This came out of the financial forensics on the accounts themselves after the preservation orders locked them. A pause. You should tell her. He stood there for a moment. $300 million. A New York developer who burned old men out of apartments and ran women off roads and deleted emergency calls. And behind him, a domestic private equity group with advisory access to the governor's office. The thing that Lena had found in the shadow records of a city dispatch system was not the edge of someone else's story. It was the beginning of its own. He walked back to the kitchen. Lena looked at his face. Tell me, she said. He sat down. And he told her. He watched her absorb it the way she absorbed everything, with the rapid, disciplined processing that had been her primary survival tool for the past 8 days. He watched her reach the same place he had reached 30 seconds ago, where the scale of what they had uncovered expanded beyond anything either of them had mapped. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The governor's chief economic advisor, she said. One of 7 board members, We don't know the depth of individual involvement yet. But the money runs domestic, she said. This was never foreign capital. This was always here. People inside the system, using the system to clean their own money through a developer who was already willing to do whatever was needed. She looked at the table. Then back at him. Walter Drain didn't die because of a foreign financial network. He died because of people with offices in Albany who needed their capital clean. Yes, Damien said. The weight of that sat in the kitchen with all of them. Then Lena straightened. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just the particular physical decision of someone who has received difficult information and has chosen what to do with it. Then we're not done, she said. No, Damien said. We're not. Ellis's investigation. Is there anything the shadow records can add? Anything in the dispatch system that might touch the state-level connections? That's a question for Diana and Ellis. Then I want to talk to them. She looked at him directly. Tomorrow, I want to sit down with Ellis and go through everything I have from the beginning. All of it. Not just the 3 incidents. Everything I saw in the audit that I flagged and then set aside because I thought it was unrelated. She paused. I don't think it was unrelated anymore. Damien looked at her. 8 days ago, she had called him from a motel room with nothing but a whisper and a dead man's switch and the absolute refusal to let what she had found disappear. Now she was sitting at her aunt's kitchen table, 24 hours after the man who had wanted her to disappear was in federal custody, and she was asking how to go further. I'll call Diana tonight, he said. Thank you, she said. Ruth refilled everyone's coffee without being asked. 3 months later, Lena Whitaker walked back into the emergency dispatch center on 44th Street for the first time since she had run. The building looked exactly the same. The phone lines were the same. The consoles were the same. The low, constant hum of the system running was the same. The smell of the place industrial coffee and recycled air, and something that was specifically that building, that particular combination of years and purpose, was completely unchanged. Lena stood in the doorway for a moment. Just stood there. A colleague named Sandra, who had been with the center for 12 years, came over and said, "You came back." "I came back," Lena said. "We kept your workstation." "I know." She had been told. She had not been sure, until this moment, what it would feel like to know. What it felt like was right. The federal investigation into Marcus Vale was proceeding through the Southern District. He had entered a not guilty plea that his legal team was already privately acknowledging had a limited future. The asset preservation orders remained in place. 3 of his former associates had entered cooperation agreements. The secondary investigation, the domestic private equity network, the state advisory connections, the longer and slower road that Ellis had described, was sealed and ongoing. Lena had sat with Ellis's team for 6 hours on the first day and 3 hours on 3 subsequent days, going through everything she had, everything she remembered, every detail she had flagged and set aside. She did not know what they had found. She was not supposed to know. But Ellis had called Diana after the last session, and Diana had called Damien, and Damien had told Lena simply, "What you gave them matters." She had not needed more than that. Margaret Vale had filed for divorce with the assistance of the legal advocacy organization at the shelter. She was living in a different borough. She had, according to Rosa Mendez, who had somehow become a regular presence in her new life, started a container garden on her new balcony. Tomatoes again. Rosa had told Lena this during a phone call 2 weeks after everything settled, and Lena had listened, and then she had cried for approximately 4 minutes, which was the longest she had allowed herself to cry through the entire 8 days of everything. She had been saving it, she realized. Without knowing it, she had been saving it for the moment, when the news was not that someone was safe right now, but that someone was building something. Something that looked like ordinary life coming back. That was worth crying for. Patricia Howe had been contacted by Ellis's team. Lena did not know the details and did not ask. What she knew was that Patricia Howe was still at the nonprofit in Harlem, still fighting for tenants, and that she had given an interview to a reporter following up on Rachel Morrow's story, in which she said, "I always knew what happened to me was not an accident. I just didn't know anyone was ever going to say it out loud." Someone had said it out loud. Lena had made sure of that. Damien called on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after everything had formally resolved. Not the encrypted channel. Just her number. Her actual number. Like a regular person calling another regular person at the end of a regular day. She answered on the second ring. "How's 44th Street?" he said. "Exactly the same as it was," she said. "Which is exactly right." "Good." A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that exists between two people who have been through something together and have arrived at the other side of it and are figuring out what the other side looks like. "I have a question," Lena said. "Ask it." The first night. "When I called. You were awake at 2 in the morning, sitting at your window." She paused. "What were you thinking about?" Before the phone rang. He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about whether any of what I'd built was worth what it cost," he said. "I do that sometimes. At that hour, when there's nothing to do, and no decision to execute, and it's just what it is." "And what did you decide?" "I hadn't decided yet," he said. Then the phone rang. She sat with that, and now she said, "Now, I think the question was wrong," he said. "The question isn't whether what you built is worth what it cost. The question is whether you're still becoming something, or whether you stopped." He paused. "I had stopped. For a long time. I think I had stopped. And now," she said again. "Now I answered a phone call," he said. "And I didn't hang up." She smiled. Not the almost smile. The real one. Full and quiet and completely unguarded. In the privacy of her own apartment, where nobody could see it except her. And that was exactly enough. "Neither did I," she said. The city moved outside her window. Ordinary and enormous and full of ordinary people doing ordinary things, carrying ordinary lives through the dark and the light and the hours that were not extraordinary but were, in their accumulated weight, everything. Somewhere in that city, a federal investigation was moving slowly toward people who had believed their money made them permanent. Somewhere in that city, a woman was growing tomatoes on a new balcony. Somewhere in that city, a 71-year-old woman was arranging a shelf that did not need arranging, with the serene knowledge that she had done what needed doing. And somewhere in that city, the most feared man in New York was sitting at a window, looking at the lights, and thinking for the first time in years not about what he had built, but about what he was still becoming. It had started with a phone call, a frightened woman who refused to disappear, a man who almost let it ring, and one decision made in the dark with nothing to go on but instinct and the sound of someone who needed to be heard that changed everything it touched. Because that is how it always works, not in the grand gestures, not in the public moments, in the private ones, in the 2 a.m. moments when the easiest thing is to stay still and the hardest thing is to answer. Lena Whitaker answered. Damien Moretti answered. And the truth, stubborn, patient, entirely unwilling to stay buried, finally came home.